What moves you to action? Now, as a relatively easygoing person, it takes a lot to get me riled up. It's not that I'm not passionate about things. It's just that as a recovering middle school bully and a trained Christian theologian, I've disciplined myself to keep my emotions in check. There seems to be a somewhat unwritten rule that when we as Christians are sad, we hide it behind a smile. If we're confused, we distract with false confidence. When we're angry, we stuff it. And while there is some wisdom in controlling one's emotions, it's certainly not the best approach when it comes to living an authentic life. When we look at the life of Jesus, it's interesting to note that it's nearly impossible to separate Jesus' emotions from his convictions. Jesus cried at the loss of his best friend, Lazarus. He mourned at the brokenness of his nation's capital city, Jerusalem, longing to gather all of God's people together as a hen gathers her young. Jesus felt joy upon the occasion of his disciples doing the things he taught them. In Jesus, we see a human who held both deep convictions and real emotions, and his emotions are what moved him to action. Take, for example, today's story in the Gospel of John. The text tells us that it was because of Jesus' zeal, a fancy word for righteous anger, that he flipped over tables and drove out money changers from the temple, saying, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." To better understand that phrase, we have to grasp something important about how the Gospels were written. The Gospels were created by followers of Jesus to convey the truth of their experience to their own faith communities. These authors took the liberty of writing down what one might call their defining memories. These were stories that held deep meaning to Jesus and to his apostles. The writers of the Gospels simply arranged them in such a way as to tell a theological story to their peers. In many ways, these gospel authors were not that different from modern-day preachers who craft stories of their own encounters with the divine to teach a theological truth. Now, the various arrangements of these stories can be confusing to modern readers because in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they tell a different story in a different order than John. The first three Gospels, the story of Jesus' clearing of the temple, it's set in the final week of Jesus' life. For John, the story is set in the first week of Jesus' ministry. Now, the difference between these two timelines might seem like an issue of historical inaccuracy. But for the authors, it's simply about different choices made for theological emphasis. John utilizes this story to illustrate the broadness of Jesus' ministry, contrasting his loving act at the wedding of Canaan with this prophetic act of cleansing the temple in Jerusalem. The other three Gospels, they keep the story in its most historically accurate place, using it to explain the deadly shift of the authorities towards Jesus. Now, to better grasp how these defining memories were used by the gospel authors, it helps to think about how we utilize our own defining memories. When you look back on your life, you most likely have a set of memories which hold significant meaning. Usually, these are experiences endowed with great emotion, times that significantly impacted you by circumstances or choices made. Maybe this was a traumatic family experience or a moment when you acted in line with or out of step with your convictions. When examining your defining memories, you can almost always find something that ties them all together. Often that something is your life's passion or your sense of purpose or mission in life. For me, my defining memories are about times when I contributed to or alleviated a perceived injustice. They're all connected by my understanding of my life's purpose, to be a peacemaker, which is rooted in my appreciation of my name. Jason means healer. Oliver means anointed one. And Mohn, well, that's a German word for the flower, poppy. Poppy, a flower of peace. With the concept of defining memories in mind, let's return to this upheaval in the temple. Jesus' passion for the temple of Jerusalem goes all the way back to his family of origin and his parents, Mary and Joseph. From all historical records, socioeconomically speaking, and using today's terminology, Jesus' parents were lower class. They were blue-collar workers. We know this from the Bible's mention of Joseph's occupation. While most often translated as carpenter, we could also understand Joseph as a day laborer. As far as Mary, we know something about Mary from the prayer that she sang upon the news of her pregnancy. We know that she celebrates her humble state, and she anticipates the bringing down of the wealthy and politically powerful. Now, clearly, Mary is not a person of means or of political ambitions. But what else? What else do we know about Jesus and his early life? Well, we know something about their financial position as a family by the sacrifice that they brought to the Jerusalem temple for Jesus' dedication. Instead of bringing the standard livestock, the family brought a dove. The dove was an alternative option for those without financial means, those without the ability to purchase or raise their own livestock. In all likelihood, Mary and Joseph were among the poorest of poor in Israel. Now, with this backstory in mind, we come to the cleansing of the temple, and this story becomes all the more interesting. What is it that moves Jesus to action? It's the injustice of the business practices of the temple. The temple business community was not only selling sheep and cattle, items that could be brought by travelers or could be bought by travelers who were unable to transport their animals from home. But these business people were also selling doves. And herein lies the injustice. The scriptural provision for poor people to bring a dove to the temple was intended to give them agency in the worship of God. It allowed them, by their own initiative, to go out and catch a wild bird and bring it as an offering to God. They didn't have to buy one or raise one from a hatchling. They just had to seek one out and capture it. There was no money involved. But now, in Jesus' time, the temple business community had commoditized the doves. They had likely caught many of the birds, if not all the birds in Jerusalem, and they were offering them for sale to the poor. By commoditizing the doves, they had made that which was supposed to be wild and free costly, thereby placing an undue burden on the poor. It was this injustice that so greatly angered Jesus, and this is why John makes it so clear that Jesus told those selling doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." In other words, as the other three gospel authors retell it, stop making this place an exclusive club only for those who have means. Remember, it's supposed to be a house of prayer for all people. As these early disciples were piecing all of these defining memories together, we see them beginning to connect the dots between this story and Jesus' earliest family memories. The connection is made in verse 17 where it says, "His disciples remembered that it was written, 'Zeal for your house will consume me.'" Jesus was moved to action on behalf of the poor because of his conviction that the house of God was not to be commoditized. It was through the integration of his real emotions and his deep convictions that Jesus is compelled to engage in good trouble. This disruptive action of turning over tables, of driving out animals, of declaring an end to the sacrificial system is a defining moment in Jesus' legacy. And it's the most tangible action that we can point to which led to Jesus' brutal death. Now, 4 weeks from now, we will celebrate not the rebuilding of the temple, which was destroyed some 40 years later, but we will celebrate the resurrection of Jesus himself, the new centerpiece of the worship of God's people. Today, I invite you to think of your own defining memories. What are those experiences that hold significant emotion for you? Take a look at a few of these stories and discern what ties them all together. And once you begin to hone in on those themes, consider how these themes connect to your core convictions. And then next time, when you find yourself feeling emotional, whether you're sad, confused, frustrated, irritated, annoyed, or angry, dig a little bit beneath the surface and discover if these feelings are connected to your passion. And if they are, well, utilize that energy endowed within those emotions to motivate you towards positive action in the face of all that is broken in our world. And may the God of peace, who calls us each into action, motivate you towards love and good deeds on behalf of the poor, the marginalized, and the hopeless. Amen.